Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really getting into something fascinating, a theory called analytic idealism.
It's definitely a different way of looking at things. We're working from some academic material that critiques, the usual views like materialism and panpsychism.
Right, and then it builds this alternative. So our goal today is basically to unpack analytic idealism,
hmm
make its core ideas clear, hopefully thought-provoking.
Exactly. It's quite a journey rethinking reality, starting from just basic observations about our experience. We want to make it accessible, but also capture the depth.
Okay, so where does the source material begin? It seems to lay down some ground rules first. Observations any theory has to grapple with.
Yeah, fundamental things like, first off, the fact that the world seems shared. We all seem to agree on what's out there, broadly speaking.
Right. You and I look at a table, we generally agree it's a table. Laws of physics seem consistent for everyone. There's this common ground.
That's crucial, intersubjective agreement. And then there's the fact that, well, you can't just wish the world to be different.
Huh. Unfortunately, no. My will doesn't directly change external reality. That's another hard constraint.
Definitely. And the third big one is the connection between our inner life, thoughts, feelings, and what our brains are doing.
Yeah, the brain-mind correlation. We know messing with the brain chemistry or structure affects consciousness. That's pretty undeniable.
So those three shared world, it's independence from our wishing and the brain-mind link. These are the observations any theory, including analytic idealism, needs to account for.
Makes sense. Now, the source then dives into the idea of matter, doesn't it? And it sort of questions our usual assumptions.
It does. It points out that matter, as defined by mainstream physicalism, this purely quantitative stuff, just numbers, no inherent qualities, that's not something we actually observe directly.
Ah, okay. So physicalism, the idea that everything's physical at bottom, it defines matter in this very specific, abstract way.
Exactly. Purely mathematical, devoid of qualities like color or sound as they're experienced. The source argues this is a theoretical abstraction, an idea we invented to explain those initial observations. It's not the raw data itself.
So it's an inference, not a given. Interesting. How does this connect to physics? I think the source had something specific to say about physics.
Right. It frames physics, maybe controversially for some, as fundamentally a science of perception.
A science of perception. What does that mean exactly?
Think of our senses, our experience of the world, as a kind of dashboard of dials. Evolution gave us this dashboard to survive, to navigate. Physics, in this view, studies how those dials behave and relate to each other.
So it's describing the instruments, the readings on the dashboard.
Precisely. It models and predicts the patterns in our perceptions. The source uses that great quote from physicist Andre Lind: "Our knowledge of the world begins not with matter, but with perceptions."
Okay, so physics tells us how the perceived world works, how the dials move. But maybe it doesn't or can't tell us what reality is behind that dashboard.
That's the implication. It's brilliant at describing the phenomena, the appearances, and their correlations. But expecting it to reveal the ultimate nature of being might be, well, asking the wrong question of it. It operates within the framework of perception.
It studies the rules of the game we observe, but not necessarily what the game pieces or the board are fundamentally made of.
That's a good analogy. Science finds the regularities, the patterns. But this source says those findings don't automatically equate to knowing the underlying ontology, the fundamental nature of what is.
Okay, so if we set aside those physicalist abstractions about matter, where does that leave us? What can we be sure of? What are the sort of metaphysically safe starting points?
The source calls them empirical givens. The first and most basic one is simply experience itself.
Just the fact that something is being experienced? Consciousness.
Exactly. Before any interpretation, there's just awareness, raw experiencing. That's undeniable. If there was an experience, we wouldn't be having this conversation, right?
Yeah, argue with that. What's next?
Well, logically, if there's experience, there must be an experiencer. Something has the experience.
Okay, drawing on Galen Strawson's point there, even if you don't believe in a fixed individual self, like in some Buddhist thought, experience still implies an experiencing entity or process.
Precisely. Experience and experiencer are correlates. You can't really have one without the other. Then there's brain function.
How does that fit in as a given?
The point is that however we define brain function, our knowledge of it comes through perception. Neuroscientists look at scans, read outputs. These are all perceptual data for an observer.
I see. The brain activity itself, as we access it, is part of the world of phenomena, of experience.
Yes. And finally, there's the common sense idea that the brain is made of matter.
But wait, didn't we just critique matter?
Yes, the physicalist abstraction of matter. Here, matter just refers to the stuff we perceive, the contents of our experience. The point is acknowledging that the stuff of the brain seems to be the same kind of stuff as everything else in the universe we perceive, whatever that stuff ultimately is.
Okay, so experience exists, an experiencer exists, brain function is perceived, and the brain seems made of the same perceptual stuff as the universe. That's our foundation.
Exactly. Theory-neutral starting points. Now, from here, analytic idealism starts to build its specific case.
All right, let's get into it. The core proposal of analytic idealism. How does it begin?
It starts by suggesting we shouldn't make a fundamental ontological split between the experience and the experiencer.
Meaning they aren't two separate kinds of thing.
Right. Instead, think of an experience as an excitation of the experiencer. Like ripples are excitations of water, or a dance is an excitation of the dancer.
The ripples aren't separate from the water. The dance isn't separate from the dancer. The experience is how the experiencer is at a given moment.
You got it. Experience is a modulation of the experiencer itself. This avoids that tricky mind-body problem. How could fundamentally different things, mind stuff and matter stuff, possibly interact?
If they're not fundamentally different, the interaction problem kind of dissolves.
Okay, interesting. So how does this relate back to the brain and our inner thoughts, that correlation we mentioned?
Analytic idealism proposes that brain activity and inner experience are two perspectives on the same underlying reality.
Two perspectives.
Yes, your inner subjective life, thoughts, feelings, sensations, that's the intrinsic perspective. You're experiencing it from the inside, as it were.
Okay.
My first-person view.
Right. And the brain function that correlates with it, stuff a neuroscientist could observe with instruments, that's the extrinsic perspective. It's how that same experiential process looks from an outside point of view.
So the brain activity isn't causing the inner feeling, and the feeling isn't causing the brain activity. They're both manifestations of the same underlying thing.
Exactly. The extrinsic appearance, brain function, is the appearance of the intrinsic reality, inner experience. When viewed from a second or third person standpoint, it sidesteps the hard problem of how matter could possibly generate consciousness. It suggests they are fundamentally one and the same process, just viewed differently.
It's quite elegant, actually. Two sides of one coin. But what is that underlying reality? The theory goes further, right? Towards oneness.
It does. To simplify things and avoid issues like how multiple fundamental minds would interact, analytic idealism makes a bold move. It proposes there's ultimately only one universal experiencer, one fundamental consciousness.
Whoa. Okay, so not billions of separate minds, but one underlying mind. Where do we fit in then? Our individual sense of self.
Our individual minds are seen as, well, dissociations within that universal consciousness, like localized patterns, eddies, or alters within that single mind.
Dissociations, like in dissociative identity disorder. We'll probably need to unpack that analogy later. But first, how does this connect back to matter, the physical world?
Okay, follow the logic. If our brains are the extrinsic appearance of our dissociated inner experiences,
Right.
and our brains are made of the same stuff, the same perceptual content as the rest of the universe,
Yeah.
then it follows that all matter in the universe, stars, planets, rocks, everything, is the extrinsic appearance of the inner life of that one universal consciousness. It's the appearance of transpersonal mental states.
So the entire physical cosmos is the outside view of a universal mind's inner processes.
That's the core idea. It avoids an arbitrary split, saying mind stuff here in heads, non-mind stuff out there. Instead, it's all fundamentally experiential, just appearing differently depending on the viewpoint and whether it's dissociated into localized perspectives like ours.
Wow. That's a unified picture, all right. Everything is consciousness or an appearance of it. Does this lead to any, testable predictions?
Well, one fascinating implication mentioned is a potential structural similarity. If both brains, appearances of dissociated mental states, and the universe at large, appearance of transpersonal mental states, are manifestations of consciousness, maybe their structures would reflect that common origin.
And the source mentions research finding similarities, like a fractal pattern.
Exactly. It cites work comparing the network structure of the brain's neural connections to the cosmic web of galaxies. People like Favasa and Faletti found uncanny quantitative similarities in how they're organized.
That's wild, as if the universe is structured like a giant brain.
Or perhaps both structures reflect underlying principles of how information or consciousness organizes itself. There's also mention of Alexander and Smolin's work, suggesting the laws of physics themselves might be like a learning process in a universal mind or network.
The laws of physics as learned behavior of a cosmic mind. Okay, my head is spinning a little now. This connects to a lot of philosophical history, though, right? This idea isn't totally out of the blue.
Not at all. The source emphasizes this by tracing the core idea, this distinction between a deeper essence and its outward appearance through various thinkers.
Right, like the terms we've been using. Intrinsic view versus extrinsic appearance. That's the basic split.
Yeah, and you see echoes everywhere. Taishani had concealed nature versus reviewed nature.
Federico Fag in the Microprocessor Guide talks about noesis linked to quantum coherence, the essence versus the classical world, as the appearance that emerges from observation.
Owen Barfield spoke of the unrepresented underlying the appearances.
Henry Corbin saw imagination, inner, potent reality manifesting as icons or symbols in the material world.
Schopenhauer's will as the driving essence with the world of representations as its appearance, a classic formulation.
And Kant, of course. Noumena, the unknowable thing in itself, the essence and phenomena, the world as it appears to us, structured by our minds. That's foundational.
Absolutely. Swedenborg's spirit world essence and the natural world as its correspondences appearance.
In Spinoza, going way back, naturans the begetting nature, substance, God, the essence, and naturata, the begotten nature, the modes, the appearance.
And crucially, the source clarifies that Spinoza didn't equate God with the material world, naturata, but with the underlying substance, natura natrans. So even a Spinozist view, if applied to science, isn't necessarily materialist.
It's really striking how this essence-appearance idea keeps cropping up, using different words but pointing to the same fundamental distinction. Okay, let's loop back to that dissociation idea. How does analytic idealism use that to explain life?
The proposal is that living organisms are the extrinsic appearance of a dissociative process within that universal consciousness.
So my life, your life, a plant's life, these are all the outward signs of a kind of splitting or sectioning off within the one mind.
That's the idea. And death, then, is simply the end of that particular dissociative process, a reintegration, perhaps.
It's a very different perspective on life and death. Is there any evidence cited for dissociation having an extrinsic appearance?
Yes, the source points to fMRI research, like Yolanda Schlumpf's work from 2014. It showed that people with diagnosed dissociative identity disorder, DID, have distinct brain activity patterns compared to actors just pretending.
So the interstated dissociation has a measurable physical correlate in the brain.
Yeah.
Extrinsic look.
Exactly. The analogy then suggests maybe metabolism, the complex process that defines biological life, is the extrinsic look of dissociation on a universal scale.
Metabolism as the physical signature of cosmic dissociation. That's bold. But why would this dissociation happen? And why does it make us feel so separate?
The source talks about dissociation being potentially literally blinding. It uses a really compelling study from 2015.
Blinding? How so?
German psychiatrists studied a woman with DD. Some of her alters claimed to be blind, even though there was nothing physically wrong with her eyes or optic nerves.
Okay, so purely psychological blindness.
Apparently. And when they measured her brain activity using EEG, when a blind alter was in control, the activity in her visual cortex flatlined. It was as if the visual input just wasn't being processed.
Wow. So the dissociation itself could actually shut down sensory processing.
That's what the evidence suggested. It shows the incredible power of dissociation to isolate parts of a single mind from each other, even from basic sensory input. The implication for analytic idealism is, well, if dissociation can do that within one person,
then maybe our feeling of being separate individuals, blind to the larger universal consciousness we're supposedly part of, is a similar kind of dissociative effect.
That's the line of reasoning. It makes the idea that we are dissociated segments of a larger mind seem more plausible, psychologically speaking.
Okay, but there's a common objection to using DID as an analogy, right?
Yeah.
People say alters and one person can't pick up objects in each other's mental space, whereas we interact physically in a shared world.
Right, that criticism comes up. The source addresses it by saying the comparison needs to be made at the right level. Our physical interactions happen within the shared reality, which analytic idealism says is the universal mind.
So the analogy should be about whether alters interact mentally within the mind they share.
Exactly, and do they? The source brings up a 1994 paper from Harvard Medical School about dreams in people with DID.
What did it find?
It found that alters do frequently appear as separate characters in the person's dreams and interact with each other within that dream.
So within the shared mental space of the dream, the dissociated identities encounter and interact with each other.
Yes, the example given is Sarah and her alters, Annie, Yojo, Sally, all being present in the same dream, seeing it from their own perspective, and interacting in the dream world.
Okay, that makes the analogy much tighter.
Mm.
The interactions in our physical world are like alter interactions within the dream of the universal mind.
That's the picture it paints. So bringing it all together, why consider analytic idealism? What are its selling points, according to the source?
Let's recap the advantages. First big one. It starts with experience, the only thing we really know for sure.
Right. It doesn't need to postulate unobservable stuff like purely quantitative matter. It grounds itself in the given.
Second, it offers a unified way to think about both the inanimate world and us. Everything is ultimately experience or its appearance.
The inanimate world is the look of transpersonal mental processes, and we are the look of dissociated processes within that larger mind. It covers both.
Third, it explains the brain-mind correlation without needing causation. They're just two views, intrinsic and extrinsic, of the same underlying experiential process, image and phenomenon.
Fourth, it explains the shared world. We all experience the same reality because we're all immersed in or aspects of the same universal mental field.
Like fish in the same ocean.
Pretty much. And fifth, it explains why the laws of nature seem independent of our wishes. Dissociation acts as an insulator. Our personal desires don't just ripple out and change the whole system.
Okay, so parsimony, starting from the given, explaining the key observations, those are the arguments in its favor.
Exactly. It presents itself as a coherent, potentially more economical way to understand reality compared to the alternatives, rooted firmly in experience.
It really does shift your perspective.
Mm.
So the final thought for our listeners to chew on is maybe this. What if you looked at everything around you, your desk, the sky, the stars, not as dead matter, but as the active display, the dashboard of a vast underlying consciousness?
How might seeing the world as the appearance of a universal inner life change how you relate to it or how you understand yourself? It's a profound shift to consider.
Definitely something to mull over. And this deep dive, as deep as it felt, is apparently just scratching the surface of the arguments presented in the source material.
That's right. The next parts supposedly get into more specific empirical evidence from physics and neuroscience that bolster this idealist view. So lots more to potentially explore.
We encourage everyone listening to reflect on these ideas, maybe even look up some of the research mentioned. It's a challenging but potentially rewarding framework to engage with.